John, please tell everyone what is it that you do at AWS?
Julian, thanks for having me. I work on our EC2 engineering team for SAP. We specialize in, I like to say we specialize in making SAP software feel like it was born to run in AWS.
And we've got people who are of all different experience levels, and so all over the world. So there's probably people who aren't familiar with SAP. So can you just give a really quick overview of what is SAP?
Yeah, sure thing. SAP is a software company. They make enterprise software. Their flagship project is called S4HANA. And this software is ubiquitous in enterprises around the world. This is not something that you're going to run on your phone, not something that you're going to install on your laptop. So a lot of people may not have heard of it. But if you work in an enterprise, you've heard of it because your business is probably running on it. Just to frame what it means, if your uncle has a mom and pop shoe store, they're probably running, QuickBooks for their finances. They outsource their payroll and they've got a spreadsheet with their inventory, something like that. But what if your uncle has a shoe company that makes shoes? So they've got factories, they've got warehouses full of shoes that have got to get out to maybe their retail outlets, or maybe they have a sales force working with third-party retailers. And they've got to work with the logistics of moving things around, moving materials around. They've got payroll in 10 different countries with 10 different tax jurisdictions. I mean, running a company like that requires extremely powerful, comprehensive software. That's what SAP makes.
Okay, cool. So now that we've got that overview, then what exactly is it that we're really talking about with today with SAP and ABAP?
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about my two favorite topics. This is sitting right at the intersection of AWS and SAP. So what we released last week in general availability is an SDK for the ABAP language. And we've released SDKs before. We have SDKs for Java and Python, JavaScript, and so forth. To me, the SDK for ABAP is special because SAP systems run on a purpose-built programming language, the ABAP programming language. An enterprise system has to be fast, it has to run perfectly, and it has to be self-documenting. It requires a special language, and I can brag all day long or glow all day long about ABAP. I'm a true fan. But what we've done by releasing an SDK for the ABAP language is we've opened up AWS's set of services to a whole new audience of developers, hundreds of thousands of programmers around the world who now in this era of cloud services have a seat at the table.
Before I ask you some more questions, I just want to let everyone here know who's listening that if you have questions about the topic that we're talking about, put them in the chat because I'm going to be looking at the chat, and if there's a question that comes up, I'll basically ask it to John. And so that's why John's here. We've also got other people from John's team. So they're going to be looking at the chat, answering your questions about what we're talking about with SAP and ABAP. So now that we just said that, so let's talk really more about what are these use cases for customers that are using SAP that now they can be able to use with this SAP ABAP on AWS.
Well, one of my favorite things about our SDK is it's a first-class SDK. It sits right alongside all our other SDKs. We didn't curate our services, so here are the services that are right for an SAP customer. No, we released all of our services in our SDK, the entire portfolio of AWS services. So the sky is the limit. Now, granted, there are some services, let's say Kinesis video streams, that I have yet to hear of a use case where an enterprise system might need to consume that data. But I challenge our audience today to come up with one, come up with a bananas idea, put it in the comments. I would love to hear it. But that's the whole point, is that we didn't have to come up with the use cases. We're giving customers everything. And all they have to do is look out the window on a rainy day and dream. I'll give you just an example of something a customer did. We have been in developer preview for 6 or 7 months. And we had a customer who had an accounts receivable process they wanted to optimize. Now, accounts receivable, that's the department that sends out invoices to customers. Give me some money, and the customer then sends money for whatever service or product they purchased. And let's say that that customer sends you a check. Now, the company is going to send the check to the bank to deposit. But first, you have to figure out which invoice the check is paying for. Because if you get that wrong, you're going to send a nastygram to that customer next month and say, hey, why didn't you pay me? And they'll say, I sent you the check, you deposited the check, and then it looks bad for the company. So this is a manual process that you have to get right. So we had a customer who used the ABAP SDK to take scanned images of checks and use our AWS Textract service to extract the text fields of the check number, the amount, the company name, and so forth, and automatically match it to an invoice. So this made a very manual process automated, and it greatly increased the accuracy. And later on, we're going to do a demo, but the cool thing is it doesn't take that many lines of code. And that's something that's really on our customers' minds today. They want to keep their core clean on their SAP system, not gum it up with tons and tons of custom code. And one way to do that is to consume services like AWS services, serverless, and so forth. So a really, really cool example. And just a couple weeks ago, we had a hackathon in Germany. And it was still fun just to watch the customers. They had a couple of days to come up with an idea, come up with a design, do a quick proof of concept, but just a great fun hearing those things. So to answer your question, I can't wait to see what customers do with the SDK. We've set the table, they can sit down and eat.
I mean, there's so many use cases that I can only imagine. I'm excited for customers. And you started to say a little bit about some of the features, like that I know you were talking about, really the ease of use. Can you expand on that more for the people who are listening today?
Okay. One thing I want to make clear, if it isn't already, this is an SDK that was written by people who love ABAP. So we wanted, SAP's ecosystem can be a little bit insular, but we wanted our SDK for ABAP to feel like it was born to run inside an SAP system. So, for example, an early design decision was to base it on pure ABAP. There's no agent to install. There's no library or anything. It's pure ABAP, which means that if a customer knows how to import ABAP code into their system, they already know how to install the ABAP SDK. They already know how to patch it. Our configuration process will seem very familiar to an SAP customer. They'll recognize it instantly. I'll show it briefly in our demo later on. So we really wanted it to feel very, very natural to an ABAP programmer. They're going to write code that's going to feel like ABAP and not like some other alien species. And probably the most important thing is that SAP was ahead of their time. They have a very fine-grained security system, role-based authorization that map, a fine-grained set of permissions to a user based on their job function. And AWS has the same thing. In our IAM roles, we have fine-grained permissions. And we wanted to make sure that this concept of fine-grained job-based permissions flows from end to end, from SAP to AWS, so that every user has the limited minimum authorizations required to do their job from end to end in the process.
That is so interesting. So one thing before we get to the demo, which I know everyone loves seeing a good demo, I definitely want to call out that if there are people here who are new and you want to watch some other past episodes that we've had, you can check out this URL. We've had them about the whole menu of AWS. We essentially cover on AWS On Air. So definitely check that out. And with that, let's see this demo. I always love seeing a good demo.
Well, good. Let's party. And at AWS, when we say let's party, we mean it's time to write some code.
Yes, so true.
Come to think of it, I don't get invited to many parties anymore. So if my screen is live here, perfect. I'm just going to start because we might have some people who come from the SAP universe who aren't that familiar with how we organize our documentation. So I just started out on our documentation page, which is a great place to get started. We've got it organized in a way that I think will be comfortable for SAP customers. We've got a setting up section, which is appropriate for your basis administrator. That's what we call a system administrator in the SAP world, for installing. We've got a section for configuring, which would be maybe for a business analyst, for example. We've got the using the SDK part, which is for the programmer, the real heroes. We've got tons of code examples out there, which we invite you to take a look at. So we've got examples for some of our most popular services. And then, of course, we've got the all-important security section, which will be interesting to both IAM administrators and SAP administrators. So this is a great place to start, and probably really cool is this Getting Started page, which has a soup to nuts walkthrough from installing to writing your first program to running it. And so if you've got a sandbox system handy, ask your boss for one, and go ahead and walk through these steps, install the SDK, and it even has a hello world type of program, which we're going to explore today. But we don't want to look at documentation, we want to go look at a system. Now, I'll just note that when we distribute the SDK, it's a zip file that you can download. And we'll just quickly show you what the contents of the zip file look like. We've got a README file, which we invite you to read first. This has a list of every AWS service. There's more than 200 of them. And we've given each service what we call a TLA, a 3-letter abbreviation. That's because SAP identifiers are limited to 30 characters, and those 30 characters run out fast. So we have a 3-letter abbreviation for each service, and then we have a transport for the service. So this will be very familiar to any SAP basis admin. They'll know what to do with these things. So all you have to do is install the core.
Just a clarifying question. So that TLA is how you refer to an AWS service?
That's right. So we needed a very short, brief, unique way to identify each particular service. You got it.
Cool.
Yeah. So a customer is just going to install the core transport and just the transports of the services they need. Do not install all of them. It'll take hours. Just to pick the ones you care about. And in my demo system here, you can see I've got my transport queue open here, where I've installed the core transport, which comes with Secrets Manager, STS, and S3, which are extremely useful to most customers. Then I've also got our location service and our translate service. So I've got 3 transports loaded in. And the first thing a customer will do after installing will be configuring. Now, the other SDKs use INI files to configure the SDKs, but that's not the way it works in the SAP world. You use something called an IMG transaction. So we've got here an implementation guide, which is a tree-oriented set of configurations, self-documenting, and with little links to the configuration screen. We don't have time to go through all of it, but I'm going to go to the most important one, which is the SDK profile. Now, any SAP business analyst will be familiar with the concept of a profile. That's a way of grouping a set of configuration together under one header record. So for example, here I've got profiles for demo scenarios, which we'll play with today. I've got a profile for finance functionality. So let's say I'm enhancing our AR or AP processes, and I've got a profile for let's say, HR. And if we dig into this, we'll see that the profile defines the default region for each system, because maybe our prod system is in one region and QA is in another for maybe a disaster recovery scenario. How does the SAP system authenticate itself to AWS? Because it has to prove to AWS, I'm allowed to access you. I'm not some random SAP system. I'm the one that's allowed to access this particular account.
Wow.
And then, probably most importantly, is our IAM role mapping, where we map what we call a logical IAM role. Let's say the role for CFO or for accounts payable or maybe an auditor, and map it to, for this particular SAP system, in this case QA, mapping it to an IAM role. So this is the point of connection between that granular SAP security and that granular AWS security.
That is cool.
Yeah. So this means that, for example, the CFO maybe gets very strong rights in AWS. They can maybe write to a bucket, but an auditor, maybe they can read everything, but they can't write to anything. That's not their job. So this connection is really important. And just to hit the final detail, in SAP's, this is their SAP security transaction, where you define a role that a user like an auditor might have, for example. This is the place where you define all of the SAP permissions that auditor needs to do their job, so those fine-grained permissions. And part of those permissions is to give this particular user access to an SDK profile, and here we have access to the finance profile, and map them to a particular logical role. So here, that's how the SAP security administrator does their job. We tried to have great respect for the jobs of an SAP security administrator and the job of an IAM administrator. We didn't change it. We have this one point joining between the two, but then each security administrator has control over their particular domain. But I promised we were going to write some code. So let's go and have some fun. I am doing what they do on cooking shows where I baked a pie in advance. So I'm going to show you what the pie looks like. And then we're going to go and make the pie from scratch ourselves. So here we have a hello world program. And specifically, we're going to take a text string as input from the user, and we're going to translate it from English to some other language that we're going to choose. And it's going to use the AWS Translate service to do the translation in real time. And Jillian, I'm going to give you the opportunity to choose what text we're going to translate. Do you want to propose a phrase?
I was going to do a hello world because I feel like that is the cornerstone of every first application.
Absolutely. Okay, great. And you want to choose, I've got high school Spanish in my back pocket. Do you want to choose its target language?
Let's do Spanish. It's been a while since I even remember what it means in Spanish, but I know we've got some people from, I saw Colombia. Maybe they'll know what this answer is.
They're going to make fun of my accent if I try to read it. Let's run it. And here we go. Hello world translated to Hola Mundo. By the way, did you know
that? World Cup? Duh.
There we go. Did you notice how fast that was? By the way, I mean it is a real-time service, and so ABAP system reached out, consumed the service, did the translation, and did it right before our eyes. A perfect hello world program. So let's go write this program. I want to show you what the experience is like for an ABAP programmer, and I'll trust you to watch the clock and make sure I don't go on too long here. So let's go ahead and make a new program here.
Yeah, we are getting close on time, but I definitely want to. I know people definitely want to see this part. This is why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, I'll just try not to belabor too many points. And this same program, by the way, is on our documentation site. So you can go and paste this into your own system once you've installed the SDK. And I'm just going to throw in a little bit of a boilerplate to get us past the selection screen, which is the screen that has those input fields. So these first parameter statements set up the input fields. And then I'm going to do what's called creating a session object. Here we go. I'm going to expand my font a little bit for you. How about that? Look at this. Okay, so I've created a session object by calling this kind of factory method, and I've given it the name of the SDK profile, in this case demo. So this is the thing that links in to that configuration I showed you earlier. So when I create this session object, this is the most important line in the whole program. This is the one that authenticates to AWS. I'm an SAP system that's allowed to do this, and maps me as a user. It says, okay, well, you are in accounts payable, so you get this role on the AWS side. So it's done all that stuff under the hood for me. It's done all that heavy lifting. And so now I can just start consuming services. And in this case, I'm going to consume our translate service, which the 3-letter abbreviation was XL8. And I use this kind of factory method, pass it the session object here. And this gives me an object which is sort of my client object for this particular service, the translate service. So now all I have to do is call methods on this object to invoke services. It's that easy. Watch this. I'm going to, let's go pretty print this. There we go. Nice. I'm going to call this translate text method here. So it's simple as calling a method on a class. I'm passing it the input text and the source and target languages converted to the necessary data type. And then the last thing I need to do is just print the output. The output actually has multiple useful things in it, like the certainty of the translation. But all I care about in this case is the actual translated text. So I'm going to use this little getter to get that. And let's go ahead and run this program. And here we go. Got my screen. Hello world. Hola mundo. It's that simple.
I love it. Oh my gosh. And I think it's just in time because we are running out of time basically at the end of our show. But there's definitely some links I want to share that were posted in the chat from John's team. And so we've got, if you want to look at the SDK that we were talking about, there was also a blog post on automate invoice processing. John, is there anything else that you'd want people to learn about before they get started?
there's so much stuff I'd love to show, but invite all your audience to go to our website. You can find the links to download it. This is generally available now. One of the cool things about the SDK is that we're going to be releasing it up to daily if necessary, because AWS is updating services every day. And so all of the SDKs are constantly being updated. So our customers should feel free to update their SDK. If anytime you read a blog, hey, we've got a new AWS service, Jeff comes on the show and announces it, then go download the latest SDK and we'll have it.
This is so cool. I mean, it really unlocks so many opportunities for customers that are using SAP. Like I like how you called it, just really up to your imagination now. So exactly. John, awesome demo. I'm really excited for what people are going to build. And thank you so much for sharing it with us here on AWS On Air.
Thanks so much for having me, Julian.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. If you missed earlier this episode, you can go and watch the rerun of it. We have it on YouTube, the AWS Events YouTube channel. We have a playlist that shows all of the episodes. And otherwise, we do have a survey. So we read the surveys and we love to hear your feedback. So please take a moment to fill out the survey. The first 10 respondents get $10 of AWS credits. So please go fill out the survey. And otherwise, we will be back here same time next week. So see you all.